Hi, everyone. Welcome to Food Talk Live. A reminder that this episode will also appear on Food Tank's podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So please sign up wherever you listen to podcasts. Today, I get to chat with Maximo Torero, the Chief Economist and Assistant Director General for Economic and Social Development for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. He's joining us from Rome, which I'm sure feels very surreal right now. Before joining FAO in 2019, he worked at the World Bank Group and at the International Food Policy Research Institute. He has published more than 40 peer-reviewed academic articles analyzing poverty, inequality, and behavioral economics in top journals. And he is the author of 14 books, including Food Price Volatility and its implications for food security. In addition to receiving countless accolades and awards, his work has been cited in numerous media outlets, including CNN, BBC, The Economist, and The New York Times. So thank you so much for joining me, Maximo. I know it's a very busy time. You just came out of a ministerial meeting. I'm hoping that you and your family and colleagues are all feeling safe and healthy.
No, thank you very much. It's a pleasure, and I hope your family is also okay and healthy.
Absolutely right. Knock on wood that everyone is doing well. You know, I usually travel to the FAO, the FAO building, at least once a year, and and I go to Italy several times a year for conferences. So I'm just, I feel for what your country is going through. It's such a wonderful place and a place that sort of thrives on socializing. So I'm wondering if you can just, before we start, give us a little snapshot of what daily life is like for you right now.
So daily life have changed substantially. I am locked down for now close to 2 months because I started a lockdown earlier because I was in contact in a meeting with a person that was positive.
Wow.
Thanks God, nothing happened. But it's a different type of operation. Luckily, the teams that we work, like in FAO, they are behaving incredibly. So we are being more productive than ever, which is good. But it's also important because there is a huge need in the world right now, and whatever we can do to help, we are there to do that.
Absolutely. You know, we've been doing this live cast every day, talking to experts like yourself for about a month now. And, out of sort of necessity, we've been focusing on what's happening in the United States, but we've been talking about Italy and China as well. But I don't think what I'm really worried about right now and what I sort of can't wrap my head around is the impact that COVID-19 will have on the global south or developing countries, places that already, lack a lot of healthcare infrastructure, that are burdened by hunger, burdened by conflict and disease, etc. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you think COVID-19 will head us into a situation similar to what happened in 2007 and 2008 when the food and financial crisis hit and we had, huge fluctuations in food prices and a lot of food insecurity that led to food riots, et cetera? What are your thoughts about that?
No, so I think we need to be very clear. The situation is different. In 2007 and 8, in the food price crisis, and then the recession later, the problem was a problem of scarcity of food because there were climate shocks that affected key exporting countries. Today, in the staple world, what is cereals, wheat, maize, corn, soybeans, and rice, we know that there are sufficient stocks, more than double than what we had in 2007 and 8. And we know that we have a very good harvest. It's a bumper harvest. What is the problem? And also we know it's a capital-intensive industry in the exporting countries. That means the labor issue is not affecting them. The restrictions, neither the health. The problem is logistical, how we move that food from the field to the households, through the trade, through the ports, and so on. Now, initially, when the lockdowns started, logistical problems start to appear. We found some problems in several countries, big exporting countries. But today, those problems are being resolved. So AMIS play a crucial role telling the world what was the level of stocks and the level of supplies today, which are good, extremely good. That's why prices of all these commodities are going down, with one exception, and I will explain why. And second, we are now able to track daily mobility of vessels. And we now know where vessels are slowing down because ports have less labor. And we are informing the market so that we reduce this uncertainty. Because why is so important? Because exporting countries get nervous and importing countries get nervous. because of the logistical uncertainty. So we need to
Sure.
inform the world that this is being resolved and the vessels are flowing. Now, the reason why we need to do that is because you want to avoid any export restriction and export bans. So today we have around 16 countries putting some type of export restriction. The level in 2007, 2008, it was around more than 30 countries. So it's a lot bigger than the situation today. And the share of the exports that are affected are a lot significantly smaller. And many countries are now going backwards and releasing their constraints because they know that there is not a problem. And that's the reason why rice is going up, is because one country, which is a key exporter of Thai rice, Vietnam, put a restriction to exports, which created this increase in the price of Thai rice, which is a very thin market. But we hope, once they assess the level of stocks they have and the level of harvest, they will release that constraint. Now, why is it very important? Because if you're an exporting country, you need to release those constraints because prices are going to go down. So it's a good moment to sell because of the demand shock that will affect all the countries in the world. Now, the other side is the high-value commodities, fruits, vegetables, and meats, including fish. Those are more problematic. Why? Because they are labor-intensive. That means that you need labor to harvest. That's the migratory labor, and also health is affecting the labor supply. And you have seen this across the world, in Europe, in Africa, in North America, everywhere. But countries are starting to react to resolve that problem by putting codes of work, keeping the health requirements. But also they are more sensitive to the logistical issues because they are perishable. And that's where we need to look carefully and try to minimize those risks by keeping, what we have been arguing is keep the value chain alive and declare this a priority sector and provide the elements. And then there is another sector of cash crops, which is affected more, cotton. Because producers of clothes expect a lower demand, they are starting to stop contracts of cotton, and that's affecting a lot the countries that are top producers of cotton, like Pakistan. Second, coffees and so on. Those are commodities that will be affected. So the difference is depending on the type of commodity, but honestly, there is no need for a food crisis right now. We should not be creating one because there is no need for that.
That's good to hear. That's really good to hear. You mentioned in a recent article in Foreign Policy that countries must resist this urge to panic that we've been talking about, and that trade restrictions and the hoarding will only disrupt supply chains. So I'm glad you touched on that, but I don't think a lot of our listeners and viewers really understand how complex supply chains are around the world. Can you just sort of describe, for a commodity like maize, what that value chain looks like, and why, if we start panicking or hoarding that commodity, it could lead to food prices rising and people going hungry?
Yeah, so the problem is that, as I said, the level of stocks are significant and the level of harvest is significant. Now, in a supply chain like maize, for example, if one key exporting country puts a restriction, there are top 5 are the ones who export 60% or 70% of the world export commodities. Africa, for example, imports mostly, which is a mostly import-dependent continent in the case of wheat and in the case of rice. But most of their wheat and maize comes from South America, from Brazil, from Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay. So if one of those countries put a constraint, then that will affect substantially the market because it will be 20% of the global exports reduced from one day to the other. The same with Russia, for example. What Russia did, they put an export quota. And it wasn't a smart move. Why? Because the quota is big enough that allowed to trade the same level they were trading before.
Okay.
But they needed the quota because of the exchange rate depreciation, which make it more attractive for the exporters to push all the wheat out. But the country needed wheat. So basically, the residual of the quota is what the country needs. Exporters have an incentive because of exchange rate depreciation.
Sure.
So that didn't affect, but the signal was not good. So the measure was okay, but the signal to the world was nervousness. And that's our job, to try to calm markets and to tell them logistical problems are being resolved. So don't create uncertainty where things are being resolved.
Okay, again, good to hear. Thanks for keeping things calm. I think that means a lot to not only developing countries, but all of us during this really uncertain time. You wrote a recent brief on COVID-19, recommending that countries expand and improve emergency food assistance and social protection programs. I mean, why is that so important right now? I mean, the answer is an obvious one, but why will those things be so effective during this crisis?
Because in the countries that we know that normally are countries in food crises, like many African countries, in small islands, for example, that has been severely choked because tourism is down, they are vulnerable to climate, remittances are down, and they are net food importers. So in those countries, the people that are vulnerable will be even more vulnerable. In Africa, where we have the poorest, they will be the vulnerable. So inequalities will be exacerbated, okay? And the only way we can help them is through the social safety nets programs. What we are arguing is that we need to expand them horizontally and vertically. Horizontally means to expand the network of beneficiaries because there will be new beneficiaries. And vertically, because we need to provide more resources to them because they will need more resources to buy food. So I think it's a mechanism to cope, because the problem is, initially we thought that the problem of COVID-19 will be a short time problem, so 6 months maximum. But the sequencing in which the continents have been moving doesn't help that. So now we are talking that this could get until December, for example. And that means that the recovery won't be a V like we were hoping. It will be a U, and it could be a very deep U. And that's what we expect. So we need to help these extreme situations with coping tools like the safety nets and social protection programs that will allow them to manage that very tough period for them. And that's the reason. One other problem is the school feeding programs. No, school feeding programs was the way in which you were feeding at least 1 meal a day to students, and all the schools are closed. So what do we do? So we issue a brief also, trying to find alternatives together with WFP. What are the alternative mechanisms through food banks or NGOs that countries are working to try to still give the meal to the kids, because that has a double purpose. It gives the meals to the kid, but also procures food from the small farmers, which is really important in this situation.
Well, and we're finding that in the U.S. I mean, I think people think of the U.S. that we don't have, that all kids eat, but that's not always the case, especially when they're forced to stay home from school. There are many parts of the country where that was the only hot meal children received every day, and we're seeing a lot of nonprofits stepping in to sort of make sure that those meals are provided in different ways. But I think that's an incredible thing to have the World Food Program and FAO working on together, because those children need that nutrition, especially now. You mentioned remittances before, and I lived in the Dominican Republic for about 2.5 years, and I remember a lot of my Dominican friends getting money from their relatives in the United States, and how important that was to them, because so many people are out of work right now in the United States and all over the world, that those remittances, as you mentioned, are going down. Why are they so important to some local economies, especially island countries?
Now, for island countries, they are a significant part of the income of the households, 40% or even more. So imagine that over the night the remittances are over. Because in the case of the US, for example, the labor law is very flexible. So a lot of the informal employees or the immigrant workers will lose their job very quickly. And you have numbers of 21 million people unemployed right now. And they cannot claim unemployment insurance because in most of the cases they are even not formal. They are informal employees. So for them, it's over the night, switch off. Now, what happens with the family, which normally are kids and are elderly? And the elderly are the most vulnerable. So it's a very tough situation. What to do? No? So one thing to do in the origin country is to find alternative ways to help them. Spain, for example, is developing mechanisms to keep giving them some transfers that will allow them to keep remitting money. And that's what we need to learn to scale up to other developed countries. And in the case of the recipient countries, in small islands in Central America, I think we need to expand them to the safety net so that these people at least have food to continue and can resist this period. We have to smooth the transition to a potential recovery.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what's, sort of horrifying to me is, we're looking at what is happening in the United States, the lack of safety net for so many people here. And again, I can't quite wrap my head around, because I've visited, 25 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I've traveled all over the world and seen so much of what's going on in developing countries. There are a lot of places where there's nothing in place. There are no social safety nets for folks. And so creating these kind of overnight has to be a monumental task.
Yeah, and in Africa, it's a monumental task. If you look at the institutionalization of good safety net programs in Africa, is the one lagging behind still. There have been improvement, but it still is lagging behind.
Right.
And that's where we need to find solutions. So the role of WFP is crucial in these situations. All the emergency programs are crucial. But one problem that we're trying to resolve is that our projections is that the number of hungry people, so severely insecure in terms of food, is not necessarily in the same areas. So the same areas that are insecure today will continue to be insecure and will go even deeper potentially. But there will be a lot of new hotspots of food insecurity in peri-urban areas and in rural areas. Look what is happening in India. People are migrating to rural areas with the hope that they will be able to get access to food, but not necessarily will be the case because it depends on their land if they get access to inputs. So what we are proposing is to launch our food insecurity experience scale across the world and do 3 rounds to be able to assess over people where are these new hotspots. And that's a pledge that we are doing. We need support for that. But we believe it's very important because our perception is that in the next year or so, there will be a lot of new hotspots of severe food insecure people that we need to help.
Sure. And I've heard projections recently that, the number of hungry people today, or when it was most recently calculated, was about 821 million across the globe. I've heard some estimates that's projected to double. What are your thoughts on what this will do that to that number?
We are working on so we have our own projections. We are building scenarios of 2% GDP decrease, 5%, and 10%.
Okay.
OECD IMF just produced their outlook 2 days ago. It's 5%, but varies country by country. I think at this point, with the uncertainty we have, nobody knows what will happen seriously in terms of GDP change. We have to be very careful. So basically, our brief that is coming on projections is just showing bounds. But coming with an absolute number, I think won't be responsible at this time.
Okay.
Because there is too much uncertainty. No, there are projections that they started saying 90 million people are going into poverty, and today they are saying 140 million people in less than 2 weeks. So we need to be careful because we could create panic when we really don't know how things will settle, and we really don't know how governments will be reacting. Look, I just came out from a meeting where there is a lot of pledges of governments, developed countries, despite the crisis, they are also living to try to help the situation. And if we are able to, in the most vulnerable continents, SEEDS and Africa, we are able to increase their resilience before the pandemic hits harder, I think we can minimize this potential effect. So let's hope we can do something quickly.
Absolutely.
So I prefer to be more careful. But yes, we're going to produce a bounds type of information so that people are aware.
Okay, we'll watch out for that. Thank you. I know it's too soon to start thinking sort of post-crisis, and maybe it's also too optimistic. But do you think that a pandemic will influence the way countries think about their food and agriculture policies, and about their farmers, and about their food workers?
Look, I don't think it's too soon because the problem that we are facing today has 2 sides of the coin. Okay, so the side that we are facing right now is a side of supply shock because of logistical problems, and the job is to solve those. There is food in the world, but we need to solve the logistical problems. But the other side of the coin is a coin of recession. Okay, so let's assume that I am right, which I am because of AMIS, and there is a lot of food in the world. And there is a lot of food in the world. Prices are going down of all the commodities except rice because of that little restriction. If demand goes down at the levels that we are expecting it will go down, that means that the demand for food next year will be pretty low. And that will affect all the high-end products, so fruits, vegetables, meats, and so on. Okay, so the next question is, what happens to those farmers? They will get very low prices. They won't be able even to recover their current capital. So we need to be ready for that. So I think we need to plan now, because what we are doing in Africa, for example, we are working with the crop calendars to explain them and to help them, to give them intelligence on which commodities they can harvest still, because the lockdowns are not so deep, and in which commodities they can plant, so that they can have for the next year when they go in lockdowns, or for the next season. Now, our concern is, okay, how we store those commodities. And we're trying to find ways in which we can accelerate the deployment of storage facilities that will allow them to smooth over time until they pass this slow part of the U. Okay, so we can store. If you have money, you can put very fancy facilities and store food, even fresh food. Now, if you don't have the infrastructure in place, you can do intermediate solutions. So one of the things that we thought that could be useful in the very, very short term is, okay, what are the traditional technologies people use to store and how we can improve them? how we can learn from them and do a little improvement so that they can keep
Right.
doing it, but at least give them 3-4 months. That's what they need. They need some time to be able to sell when the price is better. Okay, so we need to come with all the potential innovations to help them, and we also need to take this as an opportunity to increase interregional trade. That's the bigger
Sure.
change,
Sure.
because we need to promote interregional trade to reduce its physical distance. We need to increase efficiency, reduce food loss and waste, so that interregional trade could be a solution, could create bigger demand for your own producers. But that
Absolutely.
requires, in Africa, for example, it's not only tariffs, they have an agreement, but tariffs are low. The problem is non-barrier, NTBs, non-tariff barriers. That's the problem. That's where an infrastructure. Those are the ones that, and what we are proposing is to do executive roundtables to resolve problems quickly, to accelerate the process in the case of Sub-Saharan Africa. But in every region, you have a different problem. No? Now, in the SIPs, the story is a little bit more complicated, no? Because of the multiplicity of shocks. And we need to try to find solutions with them also to try to help them as much as possible. But the other thing in the more northern part of the world, where there is more access to internet and more access to broadband, which in some African countries you also have, and you have mobile money too because of M-Pesa and so on.
Absolutely.
But there, for the urban areas, what will move, I think, is closing distance, and that's basically for vegetables. So you will start looking at more peri-urban agriculture, more controlled environments, horizontal farming, that will supply peri-urban areas and urban areas. That will become profitable, I think, in the future. The case of fruits is different, because fruits, you need seasonality, you need different climates and so on. And these are trees. So it's very difficult to do this in controlled environments. That's for vegetables. So fruits will need to flow the world. So if you look at the exports and the flow of commodities, the major flows are staples, fruits, and meats, fish and other types of meats. But vegetables, very close distances, so between Europe, within Europe, and so on. So I think vegetables will start to become more localized, less international flow. The high end will keep flowing, but the fresh vegetables will start to be more local. The other thing that we hope we are able to push more is e-commerce. That was the success of China in this crisis, because they were already prepared. They had mobile money, they had all these technologies that they use and all these platforms for e-commerce. We are hoping that in Africa we can accelerate that process. In South America, it's also an option to accelerate. But that's another option that will start to. So we need to go look for opportunities.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned both e-commerce and post-harvest technologies, because those are two things that I think we all talk a lot about, but there hasn't been a lot of investment in, or maybe not as much investment as is needed. I mean, we've seen farmers in the U.S. having to pivot to e-commerce platforms because it was something they never had to do before. Now they have to do it, and I think this idea of looking at what farmers are already using for post-harvest technologies, protecting crops, and making sure that there's enough is really interesting, because I think there's been too much of a focus on using technology, high tech solutions to prevent food loss and food waste, and not enough on what farmers have already been doing for generations that, like you said, may just need a few tweaks or improvements.
Exactly, and that's where the science can help, no? So, for example, what are the challenges in storage? It's aflatoxins for cereals. And the reason why it's a challenge is because we don't have drying technologies for a small size of production, so for smallholders. The ones that exist are pretty low quality. Then storage, and how we store. And what we are pushing is for warehouse receipt systems, because that will link the farmers to the financial system. So I think there are a lot of things that we can bring, a lot of best practices. We have developed a series of briefs with best practices, which we hope will help the countries. But we need to take this as an opportunity to accelerate political changes or institutional changes that before were so difficult to do. So my aim to the MDBs and to the World Banks and the European banks is, look, instead of pushing the money in subsidies, which will create more distortions and so on, and the money will go like this in 1 second, we don't need that right now because there is food. What we need is mechanisms to cope with the process. And let's do small investments that could pay off later. It could be that this year a storage system will create a loss, but tomorrow it will be a huge profit. It will be very good when the market goes to normal. So I think we need to put pressure on these entities to really think carefully where they are going to put the money. And there is no reason why they cannot do it, because they already have a lot of designs that they can just come to reality. So Africa, for example, have agro-dealer parks designs, and many other things. Of course, we need to fine-tune them, we need to improve them, but at least we can start pushing and taking the opportunity to, instead of throwing the money to subsidies, which will be a big mistake.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. So you've worked at the World Bank, you've worked at the International Food Policy Research Institute, now you're at FAO. Can you just give us a sense of why institutions like these, the research side and the science side, will, you already alluded to why science is so important, but why is research going to be so important in collecting the data and making sure that we know exactly what's happening, not only just across the globe, but as you said, regionally and country by country?
Yeah, look, I can give you an example on what I learned. So in IFPRI, of course, is a deep, very good research center where you look at evidence and you try to document and go deep. The World Bank is an operational institution with a very good research department, but the core is an operational institution. It's basically loans to implement things. FAO is a mixture of both. It has a research component in the socioeconomic part, but FAO has the scientific arm and the commodity specificity arm. So, and it's very similar to what a Wageningen will be, but more implementing in policy because our members are countries. So my view is that the mixture of science and socioeconomic with the operational arm is the way to go. And let me explain you why. So, for example, we have a big initiative in FAO called now the Hand in Hand initiative. So basically, we target countries which are landlocked, least developed, small islands, and food crisis countries. And we go into these countries where have been poor and have been in food crisis for long times and so on and so forth. And we do territorial approaches and we identify areas where today the farmers could produce a lot and but produce in terms of access to markets, okay, profits, but they are not doing it for n different reasons, that we don't know them. So then we look at those areas and we do zooms. And then we find out that it's a problem of aflatoxins. We find out that it's a problem of seeds. We find out that it's a problem of lack of roads. We develop executive roundtables with the private sector, with the key stakeholders, and we find solutions. If it is a road, then we talk with MDBs and tell them, look, there is a huge opportunity here because the private sector can come in. So there is a lot of coordination failure. And in many countries, you see donors doing a lot of repetitions on the same thing. And what we're trying to bring with this initiative is reducing that coordination failure using evidence. So we have linked all the data that we have. We have 25 units of data generation. It's amazing the data that FAO used to have in silos, now is together in a geospatial data platform, together with the data of the bank, of all the multilaterals, all together, so that if I go to a country, I have all the information I can ever imagine. Very high resolution, the That's European great. Data, and countries can make more decisions based on information. So if you are an MDB that wants to give a loan to do a road, the minister will be able to tell the MDB, look, the road is not here that I need. The road I need is in this location because it is linking this market that I want to develop. So I am giving them more power of information to help making proper decisions rather than them just accepting what is being brought to them. I think that's the way to, because they know their problems and sometimes they don't have the tools to be able to do it because of lack of data. And our job is to try to bring and facilitate that.
Yeah, data is really power, and that's incredible. I'm glad that that's all happening, and I'm glad FAO is doing it. Before I ask the last question, I want to make sure people know where to find out more information about you. They can go to your website, maximotorero.com, and they can go to FAO.org to find more information. We'll also have both of those websites on our website, foodtank.com, and on our social media. So, I want to end on a hopeful note, Maximo. I know you're seeing and hearing so many things right now, and you've been locked down for so long. But who is inspiring you right now? Is there a particular person within FAO that's giving you hope? Is there a particular organization or set of researchers who you'd like to give a shout out to?
No, you're going to make me emotional. But look, there is so much people working so hard. And so much need today that we need to do it.
Yep.
So.
Thank you. I'm sorry to make you emotional, but I know how hard it is, the work that you do, and I'm so glad that you're doing it. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you stay safe and healthy. The world obviously needs you, so take care of yourself. And again, you can go to FAO.org for more information about Maximo's work. And
thank you.
No, no, no. And I hope everyone will join me back here again at 5 p.m. Eastern Time when I'll be talking to Dr. Green of drgreen.com. Thank you, Maximo. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
A pleasure.
Thank you.